Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Our Lady of Pompeii. Last year when we tried scheduling Alan to come to our church, we had a snowstorm. So we're grateful we scheduled him earlier this year for his part 2 in his series. So we're grateful for the good weather today. My name is Sister Joyce, and I'm Pastoral Associate here at Our Lady of Pompeii campus. It's my privilege to tell you a little bit about our speaker this evening. Alan Nowicki is Director of Programming at the National Historic Landmark Roycroft campus. He has been a teacher for more than 25 years, having taught in every grade level from pre-K through college, specializing in art and history. Alan is a regular speaker at local schools, libraries, churches, and historical sites around Western New York. His recent presentations have included talks at the Buffalo History Museum, Iowa State University, the Folger Shakespeare Conference, and the Smithsonian. We are also proud to mention that Alan's parents, Richard and Jerry Nowicki, are parishioners here at Our Lady of Pompeii. Tonight, Alan will speak to us on Searching for God Through Art, Part 2. Please join me in welcoming Mr. Alan Nowicki.
Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Sister Joyce, for inviting me back. As she mentioned, I was supposed to be here last January, but because of the weather, I had to bow out. But the only problem with that is the fact that just meant I had another 10 or 11 months to add more stuff into the program. And I realized as I was going through it this past week that I had about 3 hours of information in here, and I didn't think that you'd want to stay here that long. So I decided to cut things back, and if I have to take some artwork out, I will do that. And if you need to leave, feel free. I won't be offended. So for those, I see a lot of familiar faces out there. Thank you for being my groupies. But for those who haven't been here before, so what I do with this program is the idea of looking at art through the framework of how does this show our relationship and our connection to God. And for those who may not have do not know God, have never read the Bible, I always find it fascinating that the very, very first thing that we learn about God when we open up the Bible is that God is an artist. In the beginning, God created. So he is an artist, and we are made in his image, so it's not a surprise that we are here to create art as well. So I'm going to go through a couple different artworks, and again, if I run out of time, they'll just kick me out, and I'll just keep on babbling. And I try to frame these around different experiences that I have. Some of these are my own private adventures that I'll tell you about. And I figured I would start out with the question, where's Jesus? The last couple presentations I've done, I seem to start with an artwork by Peter Bruegel. Peter Bruegel the Elder was an artist from Northern Europe during the Renaissance. He's a personal favorite of mine. There's a couple reasons why I kind of like him is the fact that he started out as a printer in the Netherlands. He started becoming a painter. He got very interested in landscapes. And he was one of the first artists who really started doing genre paintings. And what a genre painting is a painting of everyday life by individuals. Now, he's really one of the first artists to really start showing like the middle class and the lower class. Prior to this, most artwork would have been for the richest of the rich, the kings and the rulers and the pharaohs and those types of people. And he's really the first one who starts showing simple everyday life. And he also was one of the first artists to really start showing the seasons. And one of the very first winter scenes we have is of Peter Bruegel here. This was a painting called The Return of the Hunters. And it's just a wonderful genre picture of everyday life. And there's so many little details around this painting that kind of tells a story. Another one of his paintings called The Harvesters, thought it was rather appropriate for this time of year. But the artwork I wanted to look at from Bruegel is a painting called The Way to Calvary. And it might be difficult for you to see this just because there's just so much going on here. So I'm going to zoom in on a couple different spots. But The Way to Calvary is sometimes known as the Procession of Calvary. So this was painted in 1564, oil on panel. And the question, where's Jesus? It's really kind of hard to find where Jesus is. And it almost makes me think of another artist where it started off in 1987, Martin Hanford. I don't know if anybody knows who that is, but he created a very, very famous series of books called Where's Waldo? And you had to try to figure out, well, where is Waldo hidden in this picture? Well, the same kind of thing could be said about The Way to Calvary. So where is Jesus? It's just all this mass of figures all around, and like his genre pictures, there's lots of details going on and different scenes kind of happening all over the place. So I'm going to kind of zero in on a couple different spots. I'll kind of start up, kind of upper to the top of the painting and kind of work our way down. But there's something something that really kind of stands out in the background, and that's that mountain peak. So there's this really jagged, tall mountain peak, and at the very, very top is a windmill or a mill. And you think, well, how did somebody actually even get up to that mill? It kind of looks like something that's kind of difficult to get to. And maybe the question is it meant for somebody to get to? So what is a mill? A mill is used to make bread. And many people suspect that this is actually a symbol of God himself looking down over the scene, because he is the person who gives us our daily bread. So this is God's mill, if you will, watching over what is taking place down below. Continuing to the right of that mill, you have this kind of bleak scene of these torture wheels that were used at this time in the Netherlands, that they would literally hang people from these torture wheels to torture them. And it has very similar symbolism to the cross itself. So what Bruegel does is oftentimes he is telling two stories at the same time. So from the title of this, we realize that he is telling a biblical story, but he's also oftentimes putting things in a contemporary setting for him. So he's showing things that were happening in everyday life in the Netherlands, and they were at war with Spain at the time, and this was the Dutch Revolution. So the Spanish would kind of come in and do terrible things to his country. Continuing next to that area is the Hill of Calvary itself. And you already have all these people that are kind of milling around, including children and dogs, because public executions were also a rather prevalent thing in the Netherlands at this time. And people would actually come out to watch this happen. And we already see two crosses up there, and then a third one right in the center that is being dug. So we have the setting for what is about to take place. And then we go to the very, very center of this picture, and that is where we find Jesus himself. And he is there carrying his cross. He has fallen. And it's interesting to see what is happening all around him. So you have a series of people. Are these the guards themselves? We're not quite sure. But even the guards seem to be confused on what they're supposed to be doing. So if you see, some of the guards are actually pulling the cross. Some of them are pushing the cross. You have one man that's literally standing on the cross and holding it down while Jesus is trying to get up. So it seems as if nobody really knows what to do with Jesus, which is rather interesting in and of itself. Next to Jesus and the cross, to the right of him, is a small little wagon that is carrying the two thieves. And once again, you have this large group of people that are all kind of around them. But what's rather interesting about these thieves, besides from looking rather pale and scared, is the fact that both of them are carrying crucifix, which is somewhat ironic, thinking that, well, technically the crucifixion hasn't happened yet, but yet again, he's telling the story in two different time periods. And the idea that the cross isn't just a symbol of torture and death, but the crucifix is also a symbol of strength, of hope, of continuing on down. You have little scenes again of people just kind of going on their daily life, and you have the scene of a fight that breaks out. You see a woman kind of holding on to what is her husband, with a soldier kind of putting a pike towards her, telling her to stop, with two soldiers kind of dragging him away. Now, many people believe that this is supposed to represent Simon of Cyrene, who is being asked to help Christ carry the cross. And she seems to be bothered by this fact that he's being made to do this. And it seems somewhat hypocritical with the idea that she actually has a rosary hanging from her apron. So here she is. Again, how many times do we sometimes do this where we're like, well, we're Christians, but we don't necessarily want to do what we're asked to do. And then in the foreground, we have the Mother Mary with John watching over her, and the two other Marys next to him. And they seem to be separated from this entire scene. But yet they are still there, and they seem to be the only ones that are truly mourning what is about to take place here. And then at the very, very side, the edge on the right-hand side, right above, there's a little skull there at the foot, and there's one of those torture wheels above. Right next to that torture wheel is a small little portrait. There's a priest in black who looks very mournful, and then next to that is a self-portrait of Bruegel himself. And he seems to be the only person really looking at where Christ is. So much is happening here, and Bruegel is really telling multiple stories, which I find absolutely fabulous. And he's telling how we react to different scenes of Christ himself. But I found this wonderful quote from Terry Glaspie that I think sums this painting up so well. He says, perhaps he wants us to ponder the fact that the most sacred moments can be occurring right under our noses. That is, the hustle and bustle of our lives, we are missing the things that matter the most. That whether in the 1st century, the 16th century, or our own time, Christ walks the Calvary road for our sins. His sacrifice ever relevant and ever available. That God is hidden in plain sight, we just have to have the eyes to see. The unfolding of God's plan is taking place right here in our ordinary life. Bruegel reminds us that we must pay attention if we are to see the divine story of redemption hidden in the midst of our own story. So this whole idea of where's Jesus, he's been here the entire time. We just have to look and see that he's here. So Bruegel is always a great place to start. And then I'm going to head off to Rembrandt. Rembrandt is one of those artists that when I was younger, I didn't really appreciate him too much. And the older I get, the more I start appreciating Rembrandt more and more. And I'm going to talk about this painting, The Storm on the Sea of Galilee. So as far as we know, this is the only seascape that Rembrandt ever painted. And it's actually in a museum in Boston, the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum. And in the early 90s, one of my best friends was going to college in Boston. And I'm like, oh, I'm going to take a little road trip. And whenever I take a road trip, I always see which museums are out in that area. So I'm like, I got to see Rembrandt's Only Seascape. And so I made my way out there. And this is just, again, such a wonderful painting because, like Bruegel, he's telling so many different stories at the same time. So here we are. We're looking at a scene from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 4, verses 35 through 41, of Christ and his disciples out on the boat, and they're caught at a storm at sea. Seems to be a ray of light coming down from the top left corner that's kind of theatrically lighting the whole scene. And each person seems to have a reaction to what is happening. And I think he does a great job of kind of asking us, whenever something traumatic, some type of problem, some issue, some terrible thing happens in our life, how do we react to it? And how do we react to God because of it? And so in many ways, Rembrandt is kind of showing each different way that we as humans seem to react to a problem. So I ask you out there, like, which one of these people in this boat are you going to identify with the most? So we're going to get a little bit closer. And I'm going to see if I can draw on this. Let's see if I can draw on this a little here. We'll see if this works. So my first question to you, so Jesus is out in the boat with his disciples. How many people should be in the boat? 13. Okay. So let's see. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. Well, that's kind of strange. We're going to have to figure out what's going on there. How wonderful. I have my own little eraser here. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start in the top of the painting. So in the top, so what is happening here? So the man at the very, very top of the bow, he seems to be in command. He is the leader. He is a professional fisherman. He is focused on his work, and he is doing what he thinks he's supposed to be doing. So if there's ever a problem in your life, are you the type of person that just immediately just takes charge? I'm taking over, I'm the leader, I'm taking over for this. The other men around the shaft seem to be similar, so they're trying to fix the problem. The 3 men around the mast seem to be experienced fishermen. They're frantically trying to fix the sail and solve the problem themselves. And then there's the 5th man in this scene who is just kind of holding on to the rope, and a huge wave is pounding him, and he is just trying to hang on here. Now we're heading to the back of the boat, and the back of the boat seems to be where, in many cases, I usually feel like I usually am, and that's the person who's afraid of the situation at first. So most of the crew seems to be in the back. So to start with, we'll look up at this man up here. I got my eraser on here. I'll do a laser pointer. So this man up here, he just seems to be that person who is absolutely afraid. He is just crouching in the back, looking dreadfully at the wave that is about to hit him. Got this person over here who is at the helm. He's holding on to the tiller. He's just trying to stay in charge. He thinks he's responsible for guiding the boat's course and instructing the rest of the crew what to do. And you have these 2 figures right here. These 2 figures seem to be angry at Jesus. This one right here looks like he's probably raising his voice, probably shouting at him, "Why don't you do something?" I don't know how many people have been in that situation when you have a problem. Why is this happening to me? The other person literally is grabbing onto his coat. And then you have Jesus next to them, who is just completely calm and serene, as you'd expect him to be. And he seems to be the only person in the boat. It's kind of hard to tell if he's looking at these disciples or if he's staring off at that light that is coming through the clouds. He knows who's in charge. He doesn't seem that there's a problem at all. You have this man down here in the white. He just seems to be huddling away, quiet, and just trying to, is he avoiding the situation? Is he depressed? Kind of hard to say. You have this man right here. He is just getting sick. He's seasick, and he's just literally, a physical emotion is coming out of him. And then you have this man right here. Now, he's rather unusual. He seems to be somewhat lost. He has his hand to his head as if to question, like, is this a question of woe is me? But the interesting thing about this figure is this is the only figure who is looking directly out at the viewer. He really doesn't have a sense of anything that's going on around him. And this is that 14th figure in the picture. And as far as we know, that this is a self-portrait of Rembrandt. So Rembrandt is actually putting himself in the scene and even questioning, how would I react to this situation? I don't know. And then you have one final person in the scene that's kind of hard to see. He's actually right down here. And he is the only one that is down in prayer and worshiping Jesus. And he seems to be the only one that might be serene as well. Even to the point of, it's somewhat hard to tell, but it almost looks like he has somewhat of a halo on his head, as if he is the only one who is understanding the holiness of God that is right in front of him. And as long as if you have trust in him, it doesn't matter what the sea storm is like, you'll be taken care of. So it's just a wonderful painting, and I couldn't wait to see it. And I got to the museum, and I took a picture. And here's the picture that I took. You see, I didn't realize it, but in March 18 of 1990, so just a year or two before I had gotten to the museum, a series of thieves disguised as police officers broke into this museum and stole this painting along with 12 others. To this day, this is considered the biggest art theft in U.S. history, estimated at $600 million. And 35 years later, none of these artworks have been discovered yet. So the museum, as kind of a way to tell people that this happened, they continue to have the frame of the painting still hanging in the exact same spot, just absolutely blank. And they are still trying to find this painting. If you're interested in this story, there are so many books and podcasts and everything written and told this story, but there is a documentary on Netflix called "This is a Robbery, the World's Biggest Art Heist," if anybody's really interested in hearing more about this. But I was really, really upset that I still have not been able to see this painting. So that's Rembrandt's literally Lost at Sea. The next painting I want to look at is, I'm simply just titling "In Your Eyes." And we'll see what kind of reaction I get with this. So this painting is 4 feet by 7 feet, 7 feet by 10 feet. It's very, very large. It takes up the size of a wall. So I went to see this painting as well. This was my freshman year in college. One of my best friends in the world called me up and said, "You want to go away on spring break?" I said, "I'm not a big spring break guy." I'm like, "What do you have in mind?" He's like, "I want to go to Chicago and hang out with my grandparents and go to all the art museums." Now, I don't know how many freshman college people want to hang out with grandparents and go to art museums, but I was in. I'm like, yes, that sounds like the perfect spring break to me. So I went to the Chicago Art Institute, and it was one of those moments where, I turned the corner and I saw this painting, and I was absolutely amazed. I sat there for maybe 20 minutes just looking at this painting. Are you ready? You ready for this? Absolutely amazing. And all of you are thinking, okay, I got to see where he's going to go with this. How are you going to fit God into this painting? So again, 7 feet by 10 feet, it just encompasses you. It took 2 years to paint this. And many of you are probably thinking it would take me about 2 minutes to paint this. So this was painted in the late 19th century. 1884 to 1886. And right around this exact same time is where scientists were really coming up with the theories of optical sight. And they were learning how the eye actually works. And they were figuring out how the eye actually understands colors. And they were theorizing that if you put different colors next to each other, it would actually create a different color in your eye. So to say, let's say if you put some blue paint next to some red paint, your eye will actually see purple right in the center of it. Well, that's kind of strange. So a few different artists were actually kind of trying to experiment with this and try to figure out, well, how does this all happen? And so he was theorizing, well, putting these different colors next to each other and trying to truly understand how the eye would perceive it. And this also brings up just the question of the eye itself. It's an absolutely fascinating piece of our body. So much so that as they were experimenting on the understanding of the eye, I have a wonderful quote from someone that kind of talks about the eye itself. It says, "To suppose that the eye, with all its inedible contrivances for adjusting the focus to different distances, for admitting different amounts of light, and for the correction of spherical and chromatic aberrations, could have been formed by natural selection, seems, I freely confess, absurd to the highest degree." In other words, what this person is saying, there's no way that this was just dumb luck that your eyes happened. There had to be some kind of creator that actually made this to work the way it does. Anybody want to guess on who actually said this? This was spoken by a man by the name of Charles Darwin. So even he said, as he's going through his whole idea of evolution, even he said there are elements of human species that you can't explain. It just has to be some kind of divine creator, which I find fascinating. So we come back to this wonderful painting. And I know you're all just like, this is my new favorite painting. I just love it. So it was painted by an artist by the name of Seurat. And he was, again, trying to figure out what it means to have different colors next to each other. And I also throw out the question of sometimes even God might create a situation in which you are placed next to something else that you are not sure why you are placed here. Is there a purpose? Is there a plan? Why am I placed in certain situations? Why am I suddenly placed next to a person that I don't want to be by? but yet it seems to have a connection and a meaning in my life. So I almost look at that in the same way of this painting in some ways. Because if you don't know, I kind of gave you a little bit of a lie. So this painting is 7 feet by 10 feet. But this is a very, very small close-up of that painting. So I'm going to zoom out a little bit. And you'll see how those small little splotches of color, you're now starting to lose that, and it's starting to look more and more like something else. So in many cases, Seurat was going out of his way to specifically put a certain color right next to another color. He had a purpose for it. God is also putting us in certain situations, and there are purposes for it. We might not know what that purpose is. We might not ever know what that purpose is. But at some point, we are going to be able to stand back and see the grand purpose of everything and know that God's plan is perfect and that all our little dots of color that we are was placed exactly where we were supposed to be placed. And it creates a masterpiece. And by the way, this is a wonderful painting to go look at and just stare at for 20 minutes. How am I doing on time? I'm okay. Okay, we'll keep going. Does anybody know Vermeer? Wonderful artist that really has only been known for about 120 years, even though he goes back to roughly the time of Rembrandt. So interesting enough, unknown into the mid-19th century. And in the 19th century, mid-19th century, a French art critic, Joseph Thorberger, came across a painting, this painting right here, that is called A View of Delft. He described it as superb and unusual, and had no idea who had painted it. There was no record of it, there's no signature on it. But he became absolutely obsessed about trying to find and learn who this mysterious artist was. In the late 19th century, a Dutch army general, pretty much to the equivalent of going to a garage sale, found a painting that he kind of liked, also did not have a signature on it. It's this painting right here. And he bought it for $40. Now, having no heirs at all, when he passed away, he actually donated it to The Hague. And that is where it is today. And outside of the Mona Lisa, this is considered to be the second most famous portrait ever painted in history. So it went from $40 to one of the most priceless paintings ever. And of course, the title of this one, A Girl with a Pearl Earring, in 1999, it was made into a book, which was then made into a movie, and pretty much now it's on coffee mugs and t-shirts and umbrellas and everything else now. So these were two paintings that kind of helped to rediscover Vermeer himself. And he was a master of the Dutch Golden Age, although very little is really known about his life. We only know of 36 paintings that he ever painted, which is kind of sad. But he worked very, very slowly at his paintings. They said he only painted about 2 paintings a year. Now, if you look at somebody like Picasso, who was doing 36 paintings a day, he was just regurgitating paintings out. He grew up and his studio was in Delft. We do not know of any self-portraits he ever painted. He only produced a few works for only a few minor patrons in the town, so almost all of his paintings were in small private collections. He died at the age of 43. His wife, I believe did they have 7 or 8 children? Needless to say, the wife was destitute after that. And as far as we know, she actually sold 3 of Vermeer's paintings to the town baker to help pay for food. So that kind of the destitute that they were in. But to give you an idea of Vermeer today, so of these 36 paintings, so in 2023, the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam held a big show of Vermeer where 28 of his 36 paintings all came together in one museum show, which was the first time all of these paintings were together at one time since Vermeer's death. And the show was from January to June, and I believe that there were 40 tickets per hour, and the entire 6-month show sold out in 13 seconds. Faster than the Taylor Swift concert tickets. So, at least we got something on Taylor Swift, I guess. So the painting I wanted to look at Vermeer's is this one right here. So this is titled Woman Holding a Balance. It's showing a simple everyday scene. A woman in somewhat of a fur coat standing by a table. It might be difficult to see it. I think I have a closer view, but she's actually holding a balance. And on the table, there's a small chest that has jewels, pearls on it. There's a mirror, a window on the side that's kind of bringing that wonderful ray of light coming in from the top left corner. And then there's a painting in the background. So unlike the last painting that I told you about, 7 by 10 feet, this is a very, very small, intimate painting. So this kind of gives you the size of this. So it's only, I think it's 12 inches by 14 inches. It's actually in the National Gallery in DC. When I was down there, I was actually lucky enough that there was a group of supermodels walking through, and I got a picture of a supermodel standing next to the painting. It just, again, gives you the size of it. So even though this is rather simple, at least to your initial looking from the eye, a rather simple painting, there's actually so much going on here. First of all, the composition of this. There is, this is all set up in one-point perspective. So that means the space of the painting is all leading back to one small little point in the picture. Oftentimes when artists use perspective in a good way, it's actually drawing your eye to a specific part of that picture. So if you think about Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper, that one-point perspective is literally at Christ's head, so everything's leading back to Christ. In this case, that one-point perspective is right at her pinky of her hand. So all the lines are leading back to that pinky. So it's leading back to that place where she's holding the balance. And even the balance from that kind of going down to the table is actually creating a pyramid. So it's very, very specific on where Vermeer is actually placing his items in here to draw your eye to certain places. If I get a little bit closer, we're going to look at the female here. So you have that dramatic light coming in from the window that's kind of, beaming right on this woman to just really draw her out. And she's sitting there holding the balance, and it appears as if she's holding it, waiting for it to get, perfectly balanced. So there's this sense of quietness, a stillness that is taking place around the entire scene. There's really no coins here on the table. Actually, I can get even a little bit closer to here. So it looks like it's just jewels, valuables. Is it a sense of material wealth? And there's a couple different ways that we can kind of interpret this painting. The first interpretation is this idea of wealth. So this is probably somebody from the merchant class. It's a very intimate scene. The pearls are probably a very symbolic sense of vanity, of worldly concerns, as opposed to spiritual concerns. If you can't tell, the painting behind her head is actually a religious scene. She's kind of turning away from that. Is she more focused on her wealth than she is on the spiritual? Is there a relationship between wealth and piety, or wealth and the spiritual? Does the scale signify a balance between concerns of things that are worldly or concerns that are spiritual? Where is her focus? It's kind of hard to tell. There are elements of vanity as well in here. So another symbol of vanity on the very, very left side of this picture is a mirror. At this time, you had to be very, very wealthy to be able to afford a mirror. This was not something that was typical. Not till the Industrial Revolution did mirrors become, affordable for the majority. And a mirror was a symbol of vanity as well. So there's all these small little symbols of vanity in this picture and of worldly possessions. Does she need restraint from that? And then there is a second interpretation. So the idea of vanity, of wealth, of materialism. The second interpretation is when we look at the figure herself, she seems to be set up and having symbols on her that make her represented more of the way the Virgin Mary was represented in artwork. She has kind of a white veil over her head. The coat that she's wearing is the color blue that is often seen Mary being worn. And then another element, the fact that the light is shining in, and you can just make out the light is shining on this wonderful little gold line that is coming through her coat, which almost makes her appear as if she may be pregnant. So is this Mary herself pregnant with the baby Jesus? And then it comes to the question of, well, what about the scale? So that scale was oftentimes used as a symbol in medieval art, and I'm just going to go to one wonderful tympanum. This is the Anton Cathedral in Germany by an artist who has the best artist name ever, Gisli Bertos. Ooh. His parents were not happy with him, I don't think, but Gisli Bertos, that is a great artist name. But in the right side of this, in his carvings, you'll see oftentimes in medieval times they would have this idea of the weighing of the scales, which they would actually weigh. This was an idea of the judgment. And if you had so many sins, your scale would go down. And the less sins you have, it would stay up. So oftentimes the scale was usually showing you how sinful you were. And you can almost see the demons literally trying to pull the scale down, trying to get another person, down into hell. So is this literally the idea of the judgment is coming, and the only person who's going to save you is the baby that she is going to give birth to? Add to the fact that the painting that is behind her just happens to be a scene of the Last Judgment. And Mary, she is kind of breaking through that painting, And she's literally breaking through, and on one side to the left are those that are saved, and on her right are those that are damned. So she's literally breaking through, kind of showing, I am the person that is going to bring apart the Savior who is going to save you from the last judgment. So it's wonderful that Vermeer can actually put these two different interpretations in the exact same picture, questioning salvation, but also questioning, your possessions and your material, and what are you focused on? I think that's, wonderful. So the last work that I'm going to look at is the mall. I'm talking about the National Mall in DC. I always kind of like to try to find an artwork that you would have no idea has any religious connotation to it. And yet, hopefully from now on, every time you look at this artwork, you'll be like, hey, I know exactly what that is. And this goes back starting in 1783. In 1783, the Continental Congress voted to erect a statue of George Washington to honor him. Now, 1783, this is prior to Washington even becoming president. So this would be more for his work that he did during the Revolutionary War. And with Washington being so humble, he said, well, that's absolutely ridiculous to put a statue of myself up anywhere. And besides from the fact that we have too much debt due to the Revolutionary War, that I refuse to have any money going to a statue, memorializing me. So where this statue was supposed to go to, or the memorial was supposed to go to, in Philadelphia, kind of directly behind Independence Hall, and that is the Washington Cemetery there, and that is where many of Washington's soldiers are actually buried from the Revolutionary War. I was in Philadelphia, and there actually is a statue of Washington there now, but it's not the grand memorial that was originally planned for that. But from here, the idea of a national capital actually started coming into place. So at this time, we still were pretty much Independence Hall in Philadelphia was where the capital was. And Jefferson, and this is actually Jefferson's sketch. This is Thomas Jefferson's sketch for the idea of our national capital in D.C. It was planned around a series of grids, partially because that is how Paris is designed. And Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin were absolutely enamored by Paris. And they're like, well, if we're going to do a capital, we got to do it like Paris is. So this was his initial design. At Washington's request, once he did become president, he requested Pierre Lafon, a French architect, to kind of draw up the plan for a 10-mile square for D.C. The Capitol building was going to be placed in the center's highest peak so that it would kind of shine over the rest of the city. There were going to be diagonal avenues kind of emanating from the Capitol building that were all supposed to represent the 13 colonies of the United States at the time. And that there would be an avenue connecting the Capitol down to where that Washington Memorial was going to be placed, and then a promenade off of that going east and west, going to where the president would have his house, the White House. There would be a grand avenue about 400 feet wide, about a mile in length, be lined with trees, a large promenade, which was another aspect of Paris that the Founding Fathers absolutely loved. And then there'd be public buildings placed around this promenade that would have theaters, academies, assembly halls, etc. Ending at the Potomac. So this is the Potomac right here. So think about that Washington Monument would actually be kind of like looking over the Potomac itself. Again, Washington had no interest in this whatsoever. When he died in 1799, immediately everybody's like, okay, he's gone now. Now we can actually do a statue for him. So the Washington National Monument Society raised private funds for the construction of the monument in his honor. A large competition was held in what this memorial was going to look like. It was a large temple structure, have 30 stone columns, statues of all the founding fathers, the Revolutionary War heroes, and it would be surrounded at the peak. I think I actually have, at the very, very top was going to be a large chariot pulled by horses where George Washington would actually be riding in. From there, there'd be a large obelisk that would come up from within, and it would actually hold a building that would be where the Smithsonian would be. So this was the memorial that was going to be made for Washington. How many people have seen this? Nobody's have seen this. No, it unfortunately was never completed either. And another plan that they had was also the fact that, so this was Robert Mills that ended up coming up with this plan. He had just finished completion of the Treasury building in DC. He also had a proposal that between the Capitol and the memorial would be a large garden. They literally called it the Garden of Eden. Both Jefferson, Washington, and Benjamin Franklin were all enamored by having some type of large garden, almost like a botanical garden, that would be the people's garden. So this entire promenade would just be filled with gardens, which again is a wonderful plan. Never quite happened that way. So the cornerstone for the obelisk was started. It was laid in July 4th of 1848, using the same trowel that Washington used to lay the cornerstone of the Capitol in 1793. And the first item that was placed in the cornerstone of the Washington Memorial was a Bible. And construction began in 1854, and I love some of these early pictures, just the foundation of the Washington Memorial. The base would be 55 feet wide. And I don't know if you can see, there's actually a man standing up here to just give you the size of this. The interior was going to feature a stairway that went up to 50 landings. I find it interesting that it ended up being 50, considering at this time we only had about 34 states. But to figure out that it actually ended up at 50 was, I think, is kind of ironic. They helped raise money for the project, offering donating money or even a memorial stone as an option for inside. So this was kind of somewhat of a public project. And if you've ever been inside the monument, you can see some of these donated stones that were given. And these were donated throughout the United States, including other parts of the world. U.S. cities gave, states, fire departments, fraternal organizations like the Masons, military units, Native American tribes, all donated money to support this memorial. And some of these also, the idea, so this is from a Sunday school children from New York, and it literally has the terms, a preached gospel and free press is what we need. Washington, we revere his memory. In 1854, Pope Pius IX actually donated a stone to the Washington Memorial. It was actually a piece of marble that was taken from the ancient Roman temple of Concord and given to this memorial. Unfortunately, the same year, an anti-Catholic, anti-immigrant group known as the Know Nothings took over the raising and the funds for this monument. They were named the Know Nothings because whenever anyone asked them what they were doing, they would simply say, "I know nothing." And they were very upset about this idea of the Pope having a stone in here, so they literally tore it out of the monument and threw the stone in the Potomac River. And that stone has never been found. But a replacement Pope stone was actually added later in 1982. So there is a stone once again in the Washington Memorial from the Pope. But with the Know-Nothings now taking over, and from that year of 1854, you know something else tragic is going to be happening in our country, and the Civil War is going to begin. And that puts a halt to the construction of the Washington Monument. And this is what it looked like during the Civil War. So the work was stopped for almost 20 years. It was begun again in 1876 by Ulysses S. Grant with some federal funds to help the project along. Work began again in 1879. And by this time, most people realized that the design for this memorial was just too large and too expensive, and they got rid of pretty much all the idea for this memorial except for the obelisk. So now the other problem too, since you waited 2 decades to start the project again, finding marble that actually is the same color as the marble that you started with became rather difficult. So if you ever go to the Washington Monument and see it, you actually see about 1/3 of the way up, the color of it kind of changes, and that's kind of why, is because they had to use marble from a different location and the color was slightly different. It was finally completed in 1884. It contains 36,000 stones of marble from both Maryland and granite from Maine. It opened in February 21st of 1885, and at 555 feet tall, it was the highest man-made structure ever up to that point. Now, unfortunately, it would be that record would be broken 4 years later with the completion of the Eiffel Tower, but for 4 years it was the tallest man-made object ever. In 1899, a law was passed in D.C. stating that there could never be a building of greater height than the Washington Monument and or above a height of 130 feet ever built in Washington, D.C. again. So if you ever go to D.C., at least the area of D.C. itself, everything's rather low. As soon as you get out of city limits, then you have all these high-rise and hotels and everything outside. If you fly into like Reagan, you'll see all these hotels are kind of located outside of D.C. itself, and that's because they can't build anything taller than that. So to this day, in our capital, the tallest point is the peak of the Washington Monument. I'm going to skip ahead a little bit here because I see it is 8 o'clock. The bells are ringing. But I just wanted to talk a little bit then about the very, very top of the Capitol. So maybe I'll just show you one thing. So the plan does change a little bit. They start putting landfill into the end of where the Washington Memorial actually is, which actually extended the land out. And because of that, instead of just having those 2 points and where the Washington Monument was supposed to be, well, it still is, would have been the shore of the Potomac. But they've added quite a lot of landfill in here. So they actually extended that to the Lincoln Memorial and to the Jefferson Memorial. And it's interesting to think that this is considered the Mall of America, where all Americans are supposed to be able to congregate. And I find it rather interesting that it actually forms the shape of the cross. So the very, very tip, William Fürstmuth, who was German, born in Germany, settled in Philadelphia. He was a chemist, and he was asked quite a few things. He was interested in metallurgy, the study of metals. And he was one of the first people to actually come up with the idea of aluminum. And he was asked to try to figure out something to place on the very, very top of the Washington Monument, because it being the tallest peak, it was going to be hit by lightning. And so he had to figure out a way to actually kind of create somewhat of a lightning rod on the very, very top. So he came up with this idea of putting an aluminum base on the very, very top of the Washington Monument. This was done in November 12th of 1884. The pyramid that was placed on the top of this was actually so considered such an advanced science that it was actually displayed at Tiffany's in New York City for a few months prior to it being placed on the top of the Capitol. The capping ceremony was had national publicity, and it was the first time anyone had ever heard the word aluminum before. And on the four sides of this pyramid, and you can kind of see it right here, a little bit closer view. So on the north-facing side of this pyramid was etched the names of the Joint Commission at the setting of the capstone of the Washington Memorial. On the west side was the date of the cornerstone was laid for the memorial, the date of the first stone at the 152nd feet, and the date that it was completed itself. On the south side of this pyramid was the names of the chief engineers and architects who had designed the Washington Memorial. And on the eastern side was simply two words, 7 letters, and this is what was on the east side of this pyramid. Anybody here still speak Latin? So the translation of this is "Praise be to God." To think that that is actually what is placed on the very, very top of the highest peak in our capital is kind of amazing. So from Psalm 127, unless the Lord builds the house, its builders labor in vain. Unless the Lord watches over the city, the watchmen stand guard in vain. In November 12th of 1984, to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the making of this capstone, another replica of the pyramid was actually made. And once again, it was displayed in Tiffany's in New York City. And it was placed in kind of a display inside the Washington Monument so that people can actually see what's there. Nobody's actually, going up to the very, very peak of the monument to actually see what's there. So this was a replica so people could see it. And so you could go up to this small little display area and actually see it. And it's placed kind of in the middle of the room, and you can walk around it and actually see the inscriptions that are placed there. Now, interesting enough, in June of 2007, a chaplain who oftentimes took veteran groups to DC went up to the Washington Memorial and saw the display and realized that it actually had been changed. So if anybody remembers, there was actually an earthquake outside of DC in the early 2000s that caused the Washington Monument to be closed for a while as they did structural repair. When it reopened, Chaplain Todd DeBorg realized that the exhibit had changed. And there's two things that had changed about it. The first thing, that instead of the display being right in the middle of the room, it was now pushed back to the wall, which doesn't seem so unusual. But that the pyramid actually had been kind of disoriented a little bit, so that instead of being able to see all 4 sides of the pyramid, you could now only see 3, because that 4th side was facing the wall. Any ideas of which side they decided to face the wall? Praise be to God. They also changed the descriptor for this. So this is what it originally had said. So the builders searched for an appropriate metal for the apex. That would not tarnish, would act as a lightning rod. They chose one of the rarest metals of the time, aluminum. The casting was inscribed with the phrase, Laus Deo, praise be to God. And he realized they changed some of the words around, knowing that people might not necessarily know what apex means. And so this is what the new display actually showed. So instead of apex of the monument, the cap of the monument. But there seems to be a sentence missing. The very last sentence, the casting of the inscription with the phrase, "Praise be to God." So the chaplain was very, very upset about this, and he decided to write some letters and called a congressman, and of course didn't really hear from too many people. So he started a petition, and he collected over 200,000 signatures asking for them to change the exhibit around again. And on October 30th of 27, a bipartisan congressional letter was sent to the director of the National Park Services questioning the change and the removal of the display. A response was received the same day, ending with, "We appreciate this information being brought to our attention, and we agree that the public should be able to learn as much as possible about the monument. This is clearly an oversight in this exhibit, and we will take the measures so all visitors are able to see the exhibit." And once again, that exhibit has changed, and here is the chaplain who specifically wrote and had the exhibit, so now that praise be to God can be seen once again. So just know every time you see an image of the Capitol and you see the Washington Monument, you know that as the sun rises in the east, the very, very first thing that it hits in our Capitol building is praise be to God. And I thank you. I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you, Alan, for showing us so many connections and ways that we can look for and find God both in art and in life, and in looking for what God's plan is for each one of us. We appreciate your expertise and your creative insights, as well as your sharing your time with us this evening, so thank you again. Our December presenter will be Mary Palmer, our former music director here at OLP. Mary will lead us in song and reflection on Monday, December 1st, for our musical Advent retreat evening from 7 until 8:30. The theme of the evening will be Fiat, Let It Be Done to Me. Father Aaron Kulczyk, who was also with us not too long ago at OLP, will be with us to offer adoration and also anointing of the sick for those who would like to receive that. And we hope you're all able to join us for that evening. Thank you for coming this evening. Thank you to our Taste and See Hospitality Committee for providing delicious refreshments, to Nathan, our live stream and technical assistant, and to our Holy Name Society, who sponsored the presentation this evening. There are free will offering baskets at the entrances. Please join us for refreshments in the back of the church, and have a good evening. Thank you again for coming out. Thank you.